Our guest on Face to Face is Mr. Ronald Reagan, former governor of the state of California. Here's the moderator of tonight's program, David Hirsch.
Good evening. Welcome to Face to Face. Our guest tonight is Ronald Reagan, former governor of California and 1976 candidate for the presidency. Governor Reagan, we are honored to have you here today on Face to Face.
Happy to be here, thank you.
Governor Reagan will be questioned by 4 students from Beverly Hills High School. They are Craig Corman, Tony Krantz, Donna Bojarski, and Craig Sherwood. Craig, you have the first question.
I'd like to add my thanks to David. Thank you for coming. Many people in this and other so-called wealthy school districts are concerned about the California State Supreme Court's recent ruling on the Serrano decision. What is your feeling on this, and what kind of implementation would you suggest?
Well, I'm in disagreement with the Serrano decision myself. And I think one explanation that needs to be made is when we discuss wealthy as versus poor school districts and the unfairness, the obvious conclusion that's drawn is they're talking about a district where everyone is wealthy. That isn't true. Some very wealthy school districts are wealthy simply because of a great deal of industry in the community that means great property taxes. The people may be of very modest earnings themselves and of modest living, but their school system is very plush because of this. But the idea that I always supported and that I believe was typical of California was that the state supplied money on a formula basis to school districts to help bring them up so that no school district was below a certain level of quality. But I challenge the idea of saying that a district, if it wants to tax itself more and wants to provide above that basic level of education, that it should not be allowed to do so.
So in other words, you would suggest very little change in the present system and only very partial implementation of the ruling.
That's right.
Donna?
Governor Reagan, how do you feel about President Carter's human rights policy, and what results do you believe that it will achieve?
Well, I'm concerned because there seems to be a little inconsistency with our, well, we're being rather selective with regard to human rights. This country has always had a standard with regard to individual freedom and the belief in those human rights for all our citizens. We can't impose it on the rest of the world, but we can show our disfavor by how much we go out of our way to be of assistance to countries that do violate human rights. But at the same time that we're talking, for example, of human rights being recognized all over the world, we're talking about normalizing relations with Castro's Cuba. I don't believe human rights are being violated any place more than they are in Cuba. It would seem to me that before we normalize relations there or in Vietnam, as we're talking about doing there, that we should tell them that normalization would be the natural result of their granting some of those human rights to their people, making some changes in their present situation.
Tony?
Governor, after reflecting back on your years as governor of California, how would you assess the success or lack of success of Governor Brown and what type of a job he's been doing over these past years?
Well, I have refrained from commenting a great deal on that. Having had the job, I don't know what it is, but you don't feel like picking on someone else. I think there's been some difference between his rhetoric and performance. I'm disturbed about the declining business climate in California that has seen industry leave us and a great decline in the entrance into California of businesses and industries that could provide jobs for our people. The last example was the Dow Chemical Company that had spent $4 million trying to get some 80-odd, if I have the figure correct, permissions, and finally just gave up, wrote off the $4 million, and they're going to put their plant someplace else, and there go about 5,000 jobs for Californians. I think more could be done to simplify this, sort of a one-stop shopping center where an industry coming in could find out what it was they needed to clear, what permissions they needed, and go about getting them without going from one to the other, duplicating efforts, spending millions of dollars, and then finding out that they just can't come here.
But do you think that Governor Brown has been a successful governor?
I'm in disagreement with certain approaches of his, but I would have to pick all of those out and say them or cite them and why and where I disagreed. We have a somewhat different philosophy of government, but other than that, certainly the state is not bankrupt as it was when I first took office. It is not insolvent and spending $1 million a day more than it's taking in, and for that I'm happy to give him credit.
Great. Thank you, David. I'd like to follow up on Donna's question. You stated that normalization of diplomatic relations is a natural result of granting certain human rights. Do you then feel that our diplomatic relations with Russia is not normal?
Well, here again, we speak harshly at times to Russia because of our differences and because their obvious aggressive policy throughout the world, and yet we don't match it with deed. If I could give an example, when 15,000 Cubans turned up in Angola, Secretary of State then, Kissinger, made a very strong speech, probably the strongest he'd ever made with reference to the Soviet Union, because they had ferried those troops over by plane, and said that if we were to have détente and normal relations with Russia and so forth, friendly relations, those troops would have to come home. But 4 days later he was in Moscow. Now, it would have made a lot more sense, and you could have believed that the speech was meant for Russia and not just domestic consumption, if he had said, finished his speech about those 15,000 troops and said, I'm unpacking my bags. I am not going to Moscow to talk the SALT Treaty and disarmament with Russia until those troops are taken out of Angola, brought back to Cuba. Then maybe Moscow would have listened, but they must have smiled to themselves at hearing his words, but knowing that he hadn't canceled passage to Russia. He was coming. Yes, Russia, of course, violates, in every sense that we believe, civil rights of the people. And I think it has been a weakness of our policy for many years that we have not taken a strong enough stand on principle. Now, this does not mean that you do not try to ease the strain, doesn't mean that you don't meet with them and try to see if we can't eliminate the possibility of coming to a confrontation, which was supposed to be the principle of détente. But it hasn't been very effective. Now the Soviet Union has reached a point of strength in which this country is in a hazardous position as the other superpower, and they don't give silver medals for second best in this kind of a game. I think we could have stood firmer on principle.
If you were president now, would you continue the human rights issue, our stand that the current government is holding, knowing communist leader Brezhnev's statements the other week?
Yes, I think that I would. This is what I mean by standing on principle. We've got to put morality, not expediency, into our international dealings. Now, this does not mean that we don't attempt to work out a disarmament program. But again, we could be a little more realistic in that. You're doing business with a country that has told you that its belief in the furthering of communism is that it is entitled to lie, to cheat, to steal, that anything that furthers the cause of socialism and communism is moral in their eyes. Now, how do you, without guarantees, how do you make an agreement and accept someone's word who has told you beforehand that he reserves that right to himself to cheat? This is, for example, why we should really hold firm for on-site inspection. As long as they've told us they reserve the right to lie, then we should say to them, okay, if we're going to have an agreement and we're going to do away with some of our weapons, and you say you're going to do away with theirs, you're going to be able to come here and we're going to be able to go there and see if you really did.
Governor, you just mentioned morality. The Washington Post recently reported that the percentage of adults who said that over the past 10 years this country's leaders have consistently lied to the American people reached 69%. How do you account for this staggering figure, and what do you think holds in the future for ethics and morality in government?
Well, I think that there is, right now, there's no question, but that the federal government has never been in lower repute with the people than it is. 1964, when Barry Goldwater was running for president, 76% of the people believed that the federal government did have the answers to all our social problems. So he was trying to warn the people about excessive government power when the people weren't prepared to believe it. Today, only 36% of the people believe the federal government can answer the problems. Much of this, of course, must be laid at the door of Watergate. But there has been this growing feeling, and the answer has to be a better job on the part of government. Maybe part of it is that the federal government's tried to do too many things that it isn't equipped to do. That government should be more back at the state and the local level as it was intended to be by the founding fathers. But some of it, I think, is unjustified. Once the snowball started rolling, people have this mistrust and now they don't believe anything. But also, some of government brought it on itself. Much of that is not necessarily due to the elected representatives. We're in a situation today where one of the most powerful branches of government is one that was never intended, a fourth branch, the bureaucracy. And they are the ones who feel that they know what is best. And they are making policy to a greater extent today than Congress is. Congress passes a law, the bureaucracy interprets the law and implements it, and they make their regulations many times contradictory to the intent of Congress. So we've got to get control of government back in the hands of the elected representatives. And as I say, I think that some of the mistrust is unjustified. There are some things also that I think we have to recognize that government might have to, if not lie, at least be silent. And that is in areas of strategy on international relations, where to tell the American people something would also reveal it to the enemy. For example, even to tell the American people of some of the things that we know that the Soviet Union is doing in the nature of espionage in our country would reveal to the Soviet Union, they would be able to figure out how we found that out. So we can't tell the people that.
Greg, more on the home front. Do you feel that President Carter's tax rebate plan and the $4 billion plus in jobs that he wants to provide are a good way to fight inflation and unemployment? And do you feel that inflation and unemployment can be fought separately, or can they be fought together?
Well, one of the things that I think we've been doing wrong is fighting unemployment as if it were a separate thing from inflation. The unemployment is the result of the inflation. The same economic mistakes have caused both. And you're not going to solve unemployment until you solve inflation. You asked about President Carter's economic plan. No, I don't agree with it. We've tried it before. And what it does, it adds to inflation, because most of that $30 billion is going to be, well, it's additional deficit. The deficit spending causes the inflation. The giving of public jobs, billions of dollars to hire more people in the public payroll, that isn't going to stimulate the economy, because you're taking the money from the people that are presently earning it and redistributing it to these people in jobs that are not producing any more goods and services for us. You're adding to the ratio of government employees to private employees. I think the answer is much more simple. And back in the days of John F. Kennedy in the early 60s, we followed that answer once. That is a straight across-the-board cut from top to bottom of the income tax. Now you say, well, wouldn't government lose a lot of money? That's what they said to President Kennedy in 62 and 63. And we cut the tax almost 25% across the board. And they said that over a 6-year period, next 6 years, the government would lose $89 billion in revenue. Over the next 6-year period, the government gained $54 billion in revenue because the stimulant to the economy was so great. In the upper reaches, by cutting the tax, you make more money available for investment in the private sector, which creates jobs in the private sector, productive jobs.
What about zero-based budgeting? Do you think that it would be feasible or even advisable on a national level?
We did it for 8 years in California and it worked just fine. There are a great many government programs that continue long after the need for them
No question.
has ended. And what we said to every department was, don't just come in and justify the increase you want over last year. You have to come in and justify your entire budget. And I actually had an appointee to a state agency when I was governor come into my office one day after 4 months in his job and throw the key to his office on my desk. He had wound the agency down out of existence. Said he had just gotten his secretary a job. And you know, to this day, I've never found out where the agency was. We never did miss it.
So it would be a good possibility, and you would think that it might be something we should try on a national level.
Yes. Why do we still have tea tasters? Which we have, an agency. Do you know that when World War II ended, World War II, we still had in existence in the federal government a thing called the Spruce Products Corporation, which was established in World War I to buy spruce wood for airplane fuselages.
Sounds like something Howard Hughes might have been able to use.
Governor Reagan, the People's Republic of China seems to desire to establish relations with the United States, seemingly under the condition that we abandon Taiwan. What do you think we should do in relation to Taiwan?
We have a treaty with Taiwan, and I say we tell Red China that we intend to honor our treaty with Taiwan. And I think that we explain to Red China, and they ought to be able to see it, that they should be better able to trust us if they find that we don't throw other allies aside in order to make new ones. Because if we do, then they will have to believe that someday we might throw them aside in order to make a new one.
Do you think that will endanger at all our foreign position?
No, I don't, because they, in a secret speech not too long ago, which now has been made known to us, one of their high-ranking officers, director of the Communist Party in Red China, told communist leaders there not to worry about their warming up their relations with us. And he explained it. He said, we are caught between two enemies, the Soviet Union and the United States. He said, we believe the United States is less liable to attack us based on their past history. So he said, we can't handle both enemies at once, so we'll neutralize one with friendly overtures while we prepare to handle the other. And as long as we know that, and that we only do what is also mutually beneficial in our relations with Red China, that'll be fine.
Thank you, Dave. Governor, do you think that every woman has the right to decide what to do with her life? And I'm speaking specifically about abortion. And in conjunction with this issue, what are your feelings about the proposed Equal Rights Amendment?
Well, let me answer the last part first. I'm for equal rights, and I'm in favor of any legislation that will eliminate any discrimination wherever it may be. I do not believe a constitutional amendment is the answer. As a matter of fact, I think it might cause more harm than any good it would do. It would open up a great deal of mischief with people who could bring class action suits to the government, and the courts would be bound then by a constitutional amendment. Such things as the man's responsibility for child support in the event of separation and so forth. Certain labor laws regarding heavy labor that recognizes the physical difference between men and women. All of these would be open to challenge under the Equal Rights Amendment. But now the other, do I believe that a woman has a right to dictate or guide her own life? I think that all people do, but how does this figure with abortion? There, she's not talking about her own life any longer. She's talking about someone else's life. And the interruption of a pregnancy, in my opinion, and a great deal of medical opinion, is you are taking a human life. Now, our law recognizes the property rights of an unborn child, but not its right to protect its own life. Under the law, a man can leave, a father, for example, can leave a will to his family and to any progeny yet to be born of this marriage. And therefore, if at the time of his death his wife is pregnant with his child, that child becomes one of the co-inheritors of his estate, recognized by law. But under the abortion on demand laws, the widow could go to a doctor and abort the child now, and in effect she is eliminating one of the inheritors and adding to her own inheritance. I think that abortion is justified under the same basis that we justify taking human life, any human life, self-defense. An expectant mother has the right to protect her own life against that of even her own unborn child. But just on whim, we have to, if we recognize this one thing, we are taking a human life, then I think the question becomes much more clear than it presently is.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Governor, in my last question, we started getting to the arms agreements. Would you favor a mutual restraint pact between the United States and the Soviet Union as to the cruise missile and the backfire bomber coming out of the upcoming SALT talks?
Only if we're definitely sure that we're going to get a fair trade that allows us to maintain our equation with the Soviet Union. Right now, the backfire, it is true, is posed by the Soviet Union as a moderate bomber, and we know that it can be a long-range bomber, so it adds to their intercontinental threat. But the cruise missile, a fairly economic weapon in which we're further ahead than they are, is of great concern to them, because it could be the weapon system that adds to our defensive possibility by enabling us to catch up more quickly with the imbalance that is existing now between the Soviet Union strength and our own. If there is a fair trade-off between those two weapons, this would be one thing. But Russia is so anxious to get rid of that cruise missile, where we're concerned, that it makes me a little cautious and wondering if they don't know that they're going to benefit.
What would you consider a fair trade-off?
Well, I would have to know more than I know about the potential threat of the backfire bomber. I must confess, I don't know how much that adds to their intercontinental ability to destroy this country. Right now, the great danger to this country is that on the intercontinental ballistic missiles alone, the Soviet Union believes that it can absorb a retaliatory strike by our missiles and come out with fewer casualties than they suffered in World War II. Our strategy has been based on a mutual deterrence, meaning that we'd do so much damage to them it would be unacceptable to them. They now have implemented a great civil defense system that has minimized that damage. We're following a strategy of avoiding a war. They're following a strategy of preparing to win one.
Governor, what was your reaction to Carter's instant vote plan and the reaction of the three top Republicans in Washington, that is the party leader in the Senate and House minority leaders, to back that proposal?
Well, I'm in disagreement. The easy vote plan, the easy registration ignores something that it's true. Only about half the people in this country turned out in the '76 election. But if they say it's because it's difficult to register, how do they explain the millions of people already registered who don't vote? And to say that this would not contribute to voter fraud, we have an election being investigated right now in Texas, congressman, congressional election down there, and they have the easy postcard registration. The vote was so close that there's a recount and an investigation. They have already found that the winner in that election received the votes of several oil stations, 2 or 3 warehouses, 2 city parks, a cemetery, some empty lots. Voter fraud can take place, and I don't think that this easing it up is going to make it that there be any less fraud.
What do you think motivated Mr. Brock and Mr. Baker and Mr. Rhodes to back this proposal?
I don't know, unless they feel that they might be sounding. See, very frankly, the Democrats have made the point that they believe that the greater number of people not registered are in the lower income brackets and are more prone to vote Democratic. And it may have been that Mr. Brock and the rest of them thought that they as Republicans would be sounding like they wanted to restrict the voting rights to more affluent people. And of course, I don't think that's true. I think there's as much apathy at the higher levels of income as there is at the lower.
Of course, last year you're familiar that the congressional Republicans did block an effort to instill postcard registration.
Yes. And I agree with that they should have. I wish they hadn't changed their minds.
I don't want to make this too long, but doesn't it seem to you then, by disagreeing with this, that what you're saying is, you're disagreeing with something that would make it easier for people to vote?
Not when you haven't found, as I say, when the answer is millions of people already registered. Prove that it isn't the difficulty in registering that keeps people from voting. If they don't care enough to register, is there any guarantee they're going to care enough to vote? And if they are registered and don't vote, we have a problem. I think what the problem is that both parties are going to have to exert more effort than they do to persuade the people that government by the people is only going to work if the people work at it. And conduct active registration drives, voter education to convince people. The people who don't vote, in polls and surveys, reveal that the biggest single reason they don't vote is that they no longer think that their vote matters. So what did we have? We've just elected a state senator here in Los Angeles. Only 25% of the people turned out. This means that probably 13 or 14% of the people have decided who will represent millions of people in this district in the state senate. Now, what we need to do is get after all of these people and convince them that their vote does count.
Craig, you're just over 2 minutes.
Okay. Do you favor capital punishment? And do you think that the almost public execution of Gary Gilmore was a step forward for the advocates of capital punishment?
Well, I regretted that it became such a circus as it did, but I do believe in capital punishment. I believe it's a deterrent, and I believe the figures bear it out. Go back a couple of decades, and murder in the United States was declining. It went down from 4,500 down to 3,500 the next year, down to 3,000, kept going down but at the same time, the resistance to capital punishment was growing, and the number of executions began to go down. And pretty soon, we were down to only having a few, and the murder rate began to jump. And when we finally came to the moratorium and no capital punishment at all, the murder rate jumped to over 20,000 murders in 1 year. And I just finished with this. I kept on my desk a list of 12 California murderers who had all gone to prison for murder. They had all been paroled or released, having served their time. At the time I had the list on the desk, their victims numbered 34. From the original 12, they had killed 22 additional people after being released from prison for serving murder terms.
One other thing on that subject. Do you feel that Governor Brown's stance on the capital punishment and the fact that he stated he will veto any capital punishment legislation that comes across his desk will hurt his chances for re-election next year?
I think it should, because in this state, it's all right for a man to state his own personal views. But in this state, we had an election in which 70% of the people opted for capital punishment. And I don't think that an elected representative, in face of that, has a right to put his personal feelings above the will of the majority that way.
Governor Reagan, we just have about half a minute. What will your role be in the next coming years in American politics?
Well, I have my radio program. I have a nationally syndicated column. I'm out on what I call the mashed potato circuit, speaking a great deal. I'm going to try to do some of the things we're talking about, to convince the people of this country that they have to take more of an interest in government, that they've got to do something to deal with that bureaucracy. In other words, to oppose what Cicero called the arrogance of officialdom. And I'm just going to keep trying to do that and speak for the causes I believe in.
Governor, thank you for being with us on Face to Face today.
Well, thank you.
Good evening.
Face to Face is produced by David Hirsch and Craig Sherwood. This has been a presentation of the Beverly Hills Unified School District.